Hey everybody, welcome back to the Personal Transformation Podcast. My name is Desiree and I'm joined today by Brian Hite. Now, Brian has a very interesting take on resilience. Not only is he a a dissertation chair, and has a PhD in this subject, so I'm going to be doing my best to keep up intellectually, but I'm not going to make it. So we're going to dive into that. But also, Brian's applied the concepts of resilience and taught these topics, not just to himself in his stuntman career, but also in 10 years of teaching people in the army how to be more resilient and deal with pressure. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to learn about this because I think there's an interesting piece, right? I've studied psychology. I've got the master's degree in decision science. So I really understand and I'd like to try and understand the theory behind things. I think it's really useful to know the frameworks and the models. At the same time, it's a bit, how do I say it? Call it sterile. It's sterile. Don't read a book. You can't really learn resilience by reading a paper on resilience. You've kind of got to jump into the field to really experience what this feels like. So how did you first start, I guess, understanding this concept of resilience, and where did it challenge you? What was your earliest memory of that point?
Well, that's interesting. Resilience is something that from the time we're babies, we exhibit. So it's not something that we learn or pick up or whatever as we learn. I mean, it's just part of life. It's part of being a human being. And there are some things that we can do intentionally to help facilitate resilience. But, at the end of the day, we all have the capability. We all have the resources, at least to some degree, to be resilient. And I think for me, when it became explicit, like a thing that I really focused on, it wasn't until I got to the Army. And to just be clear, I wasn't in the Army. I was working as a contractor, as a sport performance psychology consultant for the Army. And they had a program that was dedicated to resilience. That was the whole purpose of the program. So I started at one of the lower levels as a facilitator, and then moved up to the assistant primary instructor, and then moved up to the primary instructor. And throughout all of that, just became really well versed in a lot of the literature, and more than that, through the teaching of the classes, learned a lot from the stories that were told during the classes, just from the soldiers themselves. They all came from different walks of life, had different jobs within the military, and just different experiences. And to have, like you said, the theory is what it is. It just describes the broad strokes of how things work. But then what that actually looks like on the ground and how that's actually applied in different ways, that's where that's where the color comes in. And that's the fun part. And that's what I got to learn through that Army job. And then as I was learning more about that resilience, a couple things. I never stopped doing stunts. I started doing stunts when I was 20, and then I started working for the Army, I guess, well, at least the resilience program, when I was probably around closer to 40. So there were 20 years in between all of that. And at the time that resilience program came up, I was still doing stunts. So physical resilience was part of what it is that I had to deal with daily. But also, emotional resilience, social resilience. There really is resilience around a lot of different things. And for me personally, trying to work the Army job and doing stunts, and I was married and the marriage wasn't going well, and it ended up being a divorce. I had to come back from that. So there were just a lot of things in my life that right at that time, just while I was doing all this work on resilience with the Army, I had the opportunity to apply a lot of this stuff myself and really put it into practice in my own life. And I'm very, very thankful that I did, because it was a hard enough time with all those resources and with that knowledge. I don't even want to think about what it would have been like to go through it all without it. But that's resilience as far as an explicit understanding of when I started to engage, consciously and intentionally with that particular topic.
It's funny, isn't it? I've been a teacher for, I think, probably my entire career in terms of teaching different things, mostly in the kind of sales and psychology space, and teaching salespeople how to communicate a bit more effectively and ultimately get people to do the things they want them to do. They don't necessarily do it themselves, but we try and get other people to do it. As a teacher, this is one thing I found is that, like you said, the stories, the lessons you get from hearing about how other people have applied the topics, from reading into it and kind of just having to be, I guess, one step ahead of learner, right? It's that kind of deeper understanding. Was there anything that in that process of teaching that really jumped out that said, hey, these are some of the most important things for you in this framework?
Yeah, well, I kind of alluded to some of them earlier. There are, I mean, resilience really, when it comes down to it, I think can be best understood as a simple math equation. Really, it's just the number of resources we have on one side of the equation and then the challenge that we face on the other. So the more resources we have available to us that we can leverage at any given moment, the better able we are to deal with challenges in that moment. So, and when I say resources, I mean physical resources, intellectual resources, social resources, mental, emotional resources, financial resources, a lot of different resources that are out there. But truly, the more resources we have and the better developed they are, the better able we are to deal with those, just the life circumstances that are inevitable. They come up, bad stuff happens, challenging things occur. And if we have those resources available, then we can deal with them more effectively. And I think that just the understanding of, I don't want to call it, it's certainly not easy, but it is simple. We need to recognize what these resources are, number one, understand which of those resources we have really in spades, number two, and then recognize which ones we need to develop a little bit more, and then come up with some strategies for how to do that. And that's a lot of the work that I did. It really wasn't, I am a sport and performance psychology consultant, psychologist, however you want to think about it. And people think that that's solely about the mind. And it's not, because we're human. We're human. The physical interacts with the mental, which interacts with the emotional, and all of that influences the social. And then what you're doing socially with friends and family and loved ones is going to impact you physically too. So it's all intertwined in ways that are inseparable. And that was another, really, I don't even think epiphany is too strong a word. That was just a really powerful recognition on my part that, number one, we do have all these different resources, and the more we have, the better. But also that those resources are connected and synergistically just melded in ways that you can't pull them apart. And that's a good thing, because if I'm moving the needle on the physical side, I'm also moving the needle on the mental and emotional side. And the easiest way for people to understand this, I mean, the best example, because we've all experienced it, is just being tired. If we have a lack of sleep, or we're hungry, we just haven't eaten well. Well, what happens? Mentally, we don't think as clearly. We don't process information as effectively. We might perceive situations more pessimistically, again, mentally. Emotionally, we tend to be more volatile. We tend to get upset more quickly. Patience tends to be lower. Socially, we may not want to be around people, or people may not want to be around us. Whatever it is, the relationships are affected. So all of these things, again, they all go together. And changing one absolutely changes the other. If we can change our mental perspective and look at things a little bit more optimistically, that changes the chemical makeup in our brain, which changes our muscle tension and everything around that, which affects emotions and will let us lean into relationships. So I'd say that the two things that really stood out to me when I started studying and then practicing, really, I guess that's when it became very clear, is when I became practicing these techniques, was, again, just the multiple resources, trying to develop as many as I can to the degree that I can, and the recognition that they all are working together, and that I can leverage that information to help me in different situations.
That's really, it's funny that you say how they all interconnect. If I kind of look back at last year, so I was competing as a bodybuilder, and there's a lot of times where diet is very restrictive, so I am hungry, and how that plays a part, like you say, on mental, emotional, and I definitely get the social piece of people either not wanting to be near me or whatever. One question I've got though, so like you said at the beginning, we develop resilience from childhood. We fall over, we get back up again. We learn that kind of bounce back ability. Fast forward, you're teaching concepts like this to the army. Now, in my head, this is what I've got. I've got a bunch of extremely tough, resilient people who are massively focused and thinking, I just want to get after it. And they're kind of high performance individuals anyway. What's a lot of people kind of ignore the idea that we can develop resilience, or think it should be naturally kind of built over time. how did you have that reaction from people in the classroom, and how did you get them to see resilience differently if you did?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, first of all, your conceptualization of the Army is how most people's is, and it can't be further from the truth. I mean, the Army is an organization just like any organization, and there are thousands and thousands of people, and there are a lot of it's like its own little culture. I mean, they got their own mailbox, they've got their own all the stuff that a town has, an Army post has. And so there are people who are electricians and who are computer technicians and who are cooks. And I mean, there are all the different jobs. So what you described is what people tend to think of. And there are some of those too. I worked with 5th Group, which is a special forces group. Absolutely. They're like that. I worked with 2nd Ranger Battalion, also very high speed, hard charging, very, very talented and skilled group of people. And I worked with some others too that met that, I mean, individually and as a group, met the description that you gave. But that's a very, very small percentage, quite frankly, of all U.S. Army soldiers. And so the idea that they all just have it and they all just lean in and they're all type A and they're all trying to, that's just not the way that it is. So having the ability to communicate this stuff in a broader way that really does resonate with a wide variety of people is important. And that's been very, very helpful for me just in my regular life, because, especially, I end up talking about performance a lot, high stakes environments, high stakes performance settings, things like that. And when people hear that, they automatically go to things like what you said. Okay, well, it's an Army soldier going to get shot, or it's a police officer trying to catch a robber, or it's a fire person running into a burning building, or a stunt person getting hit by a car, whatever it is. It's these things that people really can't connect with or relate to. Yeah. And that's not the case at all, because when I talk about high stakes environments, I'm talking about environments where the consequences matter. High stakes situations to me are situations where the consequences matter. They're important. If you screw up, then something you don't want to happen is very, very likely to happen. That's a high stakes environment, meaning that if you have a challenging conversation with your spouse, that is a high stakes situation. If you need to discipline a child, that's a high stakes situation. If your car breaks down on the side of the road, that's a high stakes situation. So we experience more high stakes situations than we might recognize. And I think it's important for people to understand that. Also, with regard to resilience, you mentioned bouncing back, and that's one way to think about resilience. Resilience is one of those concepts that it really does help if we get the definition straight up front. And by that, I mean that there are really in the literature 3 different ways that people define resilience. And one is what you just said, it's bouncing back. So how quickly do we bounce back when something bad happens, when some challenge occurs? How quickly can we bounce back from that? So we get knocked down, how quickly do we get up? Another way to think about resilience is, okay, when we experience that challenge, how far do we get knocked down? If it just bumps us a little bit down, then that means we're resilient. If it knocks us way down, then we're not resilient. So we can define resilience in terms of how far we get knocked down by any given event. And the third way is kind of a combination of the two, and probably, I guess, in my opinion, the most useful of the 3 is, yes, something happens. How far do we get knocked down? Yes, how quickly can we recover? But more importantly to me than that is, are we able to actually surpass where we were before? So it's not just about bouncing back to where we were. No, it's about experiencing the challenge and growing and thriving and flourishing and improving as a result of having gone through that challenge in the first place. To me, that's resilience. And there's, if you want to nerd out on it, the post-traumatic growth literature is where a lot of that stuff is. But it's a concept that I think we can all, at least I would hope that we can all relate to, just this idea that something bad happened. For example, I told you I got divorced. When that happened, that knocked me down, and it knocked me down pretty far. And because of the work that I had done and the knowledge that I have, I had some coping skills, and I had some things that I could do, and I did them, and that was helpful. And that eventually pulled me back up. But having gone through those coping mechanisms and really processing the information in the way that I did and learning to change the way that I was perceiving what was happening in my life and the priorities that I had set, that propelled me way past where I was at the time of that divorce. So I improved as a result of having gone through this bad situation. And I think that very many of us can relate to that kind of thing. So anyway, with the Army, the third part of your question was, so what these people just look at you and like, look, man, you're either resilient or you're not. There's nothing you can do about it. Some people are, some people aren't. And the ones who are, they're the lucky ones. The ones who aren't, we just need them out. That is the attitude of some people. But again, once you get into it and you start talking about tangible things and you start connecting it to examples that they see every day, and you give them some tools that are low-hanging fruit. There are things that they can just walk out and go try. And to be clear, a lot of the stuff does take practice. It is a skill to develop, but there are some things that you can do that, I mean, right away, you can start seeing some differences. I mean, even if you find yourself in a negative mood, some kind of down, like you're just pessimistic and I don't know, just down and the world is horrible. If all you do is just ask the question, what good thing may be happening right now? Like, what good can I pull out of this situation? Or if you want to boost optimism, anymore, like, okay, let me just think about it this way. Whatever problem I'm having right now, there is somebody guaranteed 100% on this planet who would love that problem, would love to trade places with me. If my problem were their problem and their problem was my problem, they would be thrilled. And that's just truth. So there are some really simple ways that we can shift our perspective, that we can change the way that we view situations. And once you start teaching people that, once they actually give it a shot out in the world and see some difference, and it may not be lightning bolt differences, it may just be small differences, especially at first, but they are differences, and you can't ignore them. And when that starts happening, you start to get that hit of dopamine with, that worked, that felt good. And then you start to lean in a little bit more. Well, let me try that again this next time. And over time, you start to develop the skills. So do I get some of those people sometimes, or did I in that environment when I was working with the Army? Absolutely, I did. and it was just one of those things where it really, you had to be very concrete in the presentation of the material. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's how it applies to you. Here's the thing that you can take from that out of the classroom and put it into your life, and you will probably see some benefit, possibly very quickly. And if you present it in that way, people turn around pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think you've got to make conceptual ideas real to people. And I love how you did that. The consequence idea is not, I'm going to rush into a blazing building. I'm never going to do that, probably, in my entire life. But will I have some challenging conversations with, my wife or my child or, colleagues or something along those lines? Absolutely. Do I know what that feels like? Do I know what the kind of blood boiling, head going crazy, all of these kind of thoughts rushing around my head feels like? Yeah, absolutely. And if we can help people understand that is a kind of high consequence event, that's where kind of we can help these ideas become real, I think. And the more real they are, the more I can connect with the application, then the easier it's going to be for me to listen to the theory. So you talked about some practical techniques. I'm interested, because this is the other challenge, is we said you learn the theory, you put it into practice in the real world. What are the kind of things that you teach people? You talked about some reframing, perspective techniques there. You talked about some kind of different comparison elements. What are some of the things that you teach people that really have an impact on them becoming more resilient? And then what are the challenges you throw to them to go and test that resilience once they've learned the concept?
Well, resilience is such a broad word to, like, how do you teach somebody to be really, it really depends on their circumstances. And I think, for me, I've found more benefit in zeroing in on a few different areas that people tend to experience challenges in or with or because of, and really focusing on educating around that. So for example, many people in these high stakes, high consequence environments tend to feel stress. And the way that they, again, this is what definitions are important. The way that I conceptualize stress is through, again, for the theoretical geeks out there. It's Transactional Model of Stress by Lazarus and Folkman, which conceptualize stress in two ways. One is the perception that the situation is a threat. So you have to perceive a threat first. And then the second part of stress is perceiving that we don't have the sufficient resources to deal with that threat. So number one, something bad could happen to me. And number two, I don't think I've got what it takes to deal with it. That's where stress comes from. And understanding that it's a two-part thing and understanding how in each of those phases we can influence it becomes really, really powerful. For example, in the first part, if we can just not perceive the situation as a threat, well, then we got no stress. So how do we do that? Well, how might else we perceive the situation, or how we might perceive the situation differently is as an opportunity. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. Well, all right. So yes, the consequences are if this thing goes badly, yes, there are some bad things that could happen. Not going to argue with, we're going to assume that that's all true for right now. We can revisit that because sometimes people are not as accurate about that assessment as they ought to be. But let's assume that you're absolutely right, that if you screw this up, really bad things are going to happen. People are going to die. Jobs are going to get lost. People are going to be homeless. Everything that you're thinking is 100% true. Well, is there a way to look at this as an opportunity to focus on it differently? Well, what if it goes right? What if you do it well? Then what? What happens then? I mean, what are the consequences if that's the outcome? That's one way of doing it. Another is, just thinking about it from a personal development standpoint of whether this thing goes right or wrong. This is an opportunity for me to bring me to this situation and bring me fully, to show what it is that I can do, to demonstrate what it is that I have to offer. This is that chance. I don't get that chance every day, but I have it right now. So those are a few different ways that we can look at the situation differently to even just, that eliminates that stress goes away. If we're not focused on the fact that it's a threat, if that's not how we see the situation, well, now stress goes away. But the second part is important too, and it goes back to those resources that we talked about so much earlier, which is recognizing a couple things. One is, what resources do we have available? Sometimes we don't know. We may think we know. We may have a couple of go-tos that we lean on very heavily, but we may have some other stuff that we really haven't cultivated that might still be there. For example, in our culture in the West, we tend to be very individualistic. We tend to put a lot of value on do it yourself, do it alone. If you accomplish something on your own, that's better than doing it in a group or with a team or something. Well, that's a cultural value and you can buy into it or not. But because of that value and its prevalence, what often will happen is we might have resources, social resources, friends, family members, people who care about us and who want to help, that we don't lean on in those situations. And so we're not using the resources that we have. So that's one way. So actually recognizing what the resources are that we have. And then number two is this is a little bit more proactive, is once you recognize the resources you have and where you're strong and where you're weak, take some steps to practice, continue practicing the strong ones. They don't go away, but figure out some ways to augment the weak ones. Figure out some ways to bolster that. So for example, if you tend to lose your patience very quickly and you're very emotionally volatile, well, what are some strategies you might be able to use around that to recognize more quickly when you're starting to lose it, what the red flags are for you? Maybe it's shortness of breath. Maybe it's a tight chest. Maybe, different things that you might feel. Maybe it's certain thoughts that you have, but whatever it is, recognize what your red flags are that say, well, it's starting to lose control. Start to notice what those are a little bit more quickly, and then have some strategies to deal with them. So those are ways that we can handle stress. So again, rather than talking about how do we be resilient, let's talk about, okay, well, I experience stress a lot in these situations. Okay, well, let's break that down. Obviously, you see it as a threat, and you clearly don't believe that you have the necessary resources to handle it. If you did, you wouldn't be stressed out. So I'll pause there, because the other two things that I talk about that with are pressure, and even just with performance in general, just an approach to any given performance. Sometimes people feel very overwhelmed. They don't know how to prepare. They don't know how to handle things in the moment when things shift, that all of that. So those are two other specific areas where resilience is often what kind of comes up, but it's not really a helpful thing to talk about on its own out of those two specific contexts.
Yeah, I did an interview. This was a couple years ago, with a former FBI negotiator, hostage negotiator. He did the Waco incident a long time ago, and we were talking about how to apply negotiation tactics in business and how people get very stressed during a corporate negotiation. I said, you got any advice? The first thing he said, and this kind of ties into this, is the perceived threat is nobody's going to die if you get a sales negotiation wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing, is so it takes the emphasis off. And I think, having those frameworks, those models where you can say, okay, well, this bit, if this is consistent and I can work over here, giving people flexibility of choice allows them to identify different ways through. I think it's really interesting. So definitely going to scribble it down there. The transactional model of stress. I'm going to go and check that out. One thing I kind of read the other day is that resilience and kind of burnout and stress and all of these kind of related topics are growing in frequency. And I also think that from what I saw in the numbers, they're growing in generational elements as well. So kind of boomers didn't have as much stress and anxiety or burnout aspects as kind of where are we up to now? Gen Z, Gen AA, probably we're coming back through it again. You're doing kind of keynote work and a lot of talks and speeches as well. Why do you feel people are getting more stressed, more pressure? Why are we experiencing more performance anxiety and things as kind of time goes by? Have you got any theories on that?
Well, I mean, I would say when I hear stuff like that, and I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm just going to say that where I start when I hear stuff like that is, how are they measuring it? Like, how do we know? And the reason that's important is because sometimes, especially, so the Bible for mental disorders is called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. They're on, I think it's 5 TR is what it is right now, if I'm not mistaken. So it continues to revamp. And every time it does, every time they come out with a new version, it changes a little bit. Some things are disorders, some things aren't disorders, some things have different criteria that need to be met in order to be considered a disorder. And every time that happens, then the number changes in terms of how prevalent these things are. And the easiest way for anybody who watches football out there, at least National Football League and American football, what just happened, I don't even know when it happened because I've kind of been out of watching football for a while, is there's now a week 18, meaning the teams play 17 games now instead of 16 games in a season. And that just ended this past weekend. And I was watching some of the games and I kept hearing the announcer say, oh, he just got a 1,000-yard season and it's the first time he's ever done that. Was like, well, yeah, he just had an extra game to do it in, Yeah. So there will be a whole lot more. So the numbers are getting ready to change in the NFL. Whatever the stats are this year, they've had one game more than people earlier than them had. So I just say all that to say that when I hear about, well, this changed or this is getting worse or this is getting better, either direction, how are we measuring it? How do we know? How are those data being collected and analyzed? So, but let's assume that it's true, that that's actually happening, that the different generations are becoming more anxious and more stressed and whatever. I was reading an article very recently about kind of about this concept. It's about the idea, and it's an interesting idea, and it's very easy to demonstrate the idea that we need stress, broadly defined, in order to grow. And so, for example, our muscles, if we're going to build muscle, by building muscle is actually tearing muscle and then the muscle recovering. That's how that works. It's not the muscle just stays the same and then it just continues to build when you exercise. No, every time you exercise, you're tearing muscle, you're damaging it, and then it has to build itself back. So as a bodybuilder, you know that. Well, that's the way that not just physically, that's how we work too. It's how nature works. Trees that grow in environments where the wind never blows on them or whatever, their roots don't really set. But those trees that experience adversity out in nature, they're very strongly set. And we as human beings are the same thing. So we need certain levels of adversity, physical, mental, emotional, these different challenges that we face. We need those, and we need to be able to work through them. Now, I'm not saying that we need to discovery learn through the whole thing, that we need to always recreate the wheel. We can and should learn from everybody else, understand these techniques, understand that there really are some strategies that we can apply to make it more likely that we will develop, grow, improve as a result of having gone through this challenge. But we do need the challenges. And that's something that has been, at least according to some broad literature, lacking in kids in particular. That many parents for at least a couple generations have done their best to protect their kid. And I'll tell you, as a parent myself, my daughter's 11, I struggle with this one regularly, because to me as a parent, I want that child to smile nonstop 100% of the time that she's awake. And if she's smiling when she's sleeping, that's okay too. I want her happy. I want her safe. I want her taken care of. And I know that that's not good for her. And that's weird. That's a paradox. In order to improve her, she needs to experience problems. That's weird for people to consider, but it's absolutely seems to be the case. And again, not just in people and not just in kids and not just in this context, but across the board. Adversity strengthens. And if we allow people to experience adversity, particularly when, number one, we've provided them with the strategies and skills to deal with it, and number two, we provide them with the support and the coaching to help them apply these things and learn them and use them, that's when the resilience really does develop. So if it's true that people are more anxious, are less able to deal with things, my guess is that probably our society, and again, this is a hard thing to say is a bad thing, but our society is getting easier. We're, we don't have to go to the outhouse anymore. We have indoor plumbing. We don't even have to get up to turn on TV. We've got little buttons that we could, in fact, you can talk to your TV. You don't even have to push a button. Yeah. So society is getting easier, and that's eliminating some of the challenges, some of the adversity, and that limitation of the adversity, I think, could be having detrimental effects on again, resilience in other areas.
Yeah, I'm a girl dad as well, and I have that exact same challenge. I'm like trying to be the protective dad, and like you say, provide, give her everything, emotional support, everything that she wants and needs, and all those things. Never kind of go through any form of lack. And then also, I know that that's taking her legs away, so that when things do happen, like we have this situation now. So she's just started kickboxing about a few months ago. And she's got her white belt, and I think this week she's going to get her first little stripe, which is cool. So moving on towards the next belt. But when she doesn't get things, like she gets upset, she gets annoyed, she gets frustrated, like things should happen now. Why am I not getting this? Because all the rest of the time I get everything. And I was like, what do you mean I've got to work for this stripe? I'm not going to get it immediately. It's like, well, yeah. And so for me, I love that contact. I love that contrast, but I also know that it's going to create arguments and tension at home. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's try and balance it and things along those lines. So yeah, I don't know if it's true. And yeah, the 17-week, I saw the thing, Saquon Barkley versus Eric Dickerson, I think is the kind of single season rushing yards record that was at risk. I think Eric Dickerson still got it. But it's that idea, like you redefine the metrics to tell a more interesting story. Which I'm sure you probably see all the time in the dissertations you're grading anyway, university.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I really, it's if there were something that if I could be in charge of the world, particularly math education, whatever, I would say statistics, bring it in very early. We just don't, for whatever reason, human beings aren't built to understand probability. And that's a big one, but any of statistics, like really understanding the difference between correlation and causation and taking that very seriously. I mean, there are so many concepts in statistics that even if you don't know how to do all the math, and I don't, the software does the math, but I understand what it's for. I understand when you do the statistics. I understand the story that the numbers tell me when they come out. And if more people could understand that, I really do think it would be better. And one of those questions, that is just a question, like you said, well, are we measuring apples and oranges? Because Eric Dickerson did a, however many game season, and this guy did a this many game season. That's apples and oranges. Maybe a Granny Smith apple and a Honeycrisp apple. Maybe they're still both apples, but they're different. And you got to know whether you're measuring the same thing or not.
Exactly. No, don't get me on the maths. That's the other area, I think, kind of back in the day. One of the things that's coming up a little bit lately is this idea of rock bottom. I think a lot of people are getting to a point where the stress, the anxiety levels are so high that they just feel out of control. They feel stuck in their situations, and it gets to a point where people feel a little bit hopeless. And we see this kind of lashing out in terms of reactions. We see people getting addicted and avoiding things. We see all these different aspects. I think resilience and mental toughness has got a huge part to play in the kind of the recovery from that aspect. When you're dealing with people who are in that situation where it feels really dark, are there any initial kind of techniques or things you get them to focus on just to help turn the corner?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, and again, this would depend on the person or the situation, but in general, where I would go is, and Simon, I'm blanking on his last name, Sinek, I think maybe, it just does, he marketing, he did a great job with this. It's just the why, is really understanding why. And this comes from several different theories, but one that I lean on a lot is called self-determination theory. And it's a theory of well-being. It's a macro theory. There are, I think at the moment, 6 mini theories that go along with it. But essentially why I say that is because it's about connecting what you're doing to your core values, to the things that really matter to you, the things that are at the heart of how you see yourself, how you define yourself. If you can align behavior with that, then you're in a good place. And often when people are burned out in the way that you just described, they don't see that. They don't see at all. If you ask them the question, why are you doing what you're doing? There would be that, whatever the answer might be, it's not going to be anything connected to, because it's part of who I am, because I'm doing this because it matters, because this right here is what life is about. You wouldn't hear that answer at all.
Yeah.
What you'd probably hear is, well, because they're paying me, or because if I don't, then I'm going to have this other big thing that I don't want. That's probably what you'll hear. So the first thing is really trying to identify what it is, even because a lot of times we can't change our situation. It's not about, oh, well, if you're doing it, well, then just do something different. A lot of times people aren't in that circumstance where they can just up and leave wherever or move wherever they want. So it becomes about changing the perspective and changing, less about even perspective and just more about what are we choosing to focus on. This is where attention becomes fascinating to me, because our realities are defined by what has made it into our attentional awareness and by nothing else. That's it. Any memory that you have, any story you ever tell, any answer to the question, how was your day or what did you do, is completely and totally the result of what made it into your attentional awareness, externally and internally. So understanding that we can redirect our attention to different things, to different components and aspects of the situation, and we can reframe or change the way that the meaning that we assign to that stuff that we're looking at. So maybe we're looking at the same thing. Maybe it's a boss that we're not really happy with, and that is being interpreted as something holding us back, something that's keeping us down, something that's making us miserable. Well, we may not be able to change the fact that the boss is there or any of the boss's behaviors, but maybe we can look at it as, okay, well, this is a chance for me to develop some skills that clearly I'm bad at, because look at how miserable I am. So I've got some things I need to develop and improve. And this is a chance for me to do that in this moment. And this boss isn't going to last forever. The world is impermanent. Things change constantly. Either I'm leaving or he or she's leaving. Something's going to be different. And when it is, I will have these extra skills that I can apply to not only my work, but my life around me. That would just be an example of a way that you might keep your attention on the same thing, but just look at it differently. So that why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you engaged in the activities that you are? Making that answer be something closer to home, something closer to your heart, something closer to that integral aspect of you. That would be the very first thing that I would do. And then the second thing is, once we have that and that just foundation, that kind of life, I think about it as a like the ring that you throw to somebody drowning, it's like that. Well, then you got to bring them in. You got to get them on the boat. So how do we do that? Well, that answer is around Maslow's model of burnout. Maslow spelled M-A-S-C Mas and L-O-C-H or L-A-C-H. I don't remember, but Maslow, burnout model. And there are three components to it. One is emotional exhaustion, another is depersonalization, and another is personal accomplishment. Let me just describe what those are. When we're burned out, emotional exhaustion might be one reason for that. And what it is just that feeling that we've given all we can give. It's not necessarily a physical burnout, meaning that we're physically fatigued or we're physically tired. It's an emotional one. I have given all of myself. I have put everything I have of me into this. I've cared so hard that my caring is now tired. And that's what it's like. So that's emotional exhaustion. Depersonalization is when that why starts to disappear. It's like, we start to think, all right, well, whatever, this doesn't matter anyway. There's really no reason for me doing this. There's no upside, or, if there is, it's not for me. So whatever. And then the last one, personal accomplishment, just means that we're perceiving the situation when that's affecting burnout. We're perceiving the situation as something that's we're not really benefiting from, or we're not growing as a result of. We're kind of stagnant. We're in a plateau that we're not really benefiting or growing or developing or moving really in any kind of direction that we want to go. And those are three very separate things. And when we experience burnout, that burnout might be the result of a combination of all three. It might be one more heavily than the other two. But exploring that and really understanding those things and asking those relevant questions can help you identify that. And then you can start to pull yourself back on the boat. Once you know what the problem is, then you can get yourself pulled out.
You mentioned something really interesting there, which is this idea of attention, and how attention and what we're focusing on directs our feelings, our reactions, and all those things. We moved to the US in August, and was it September or November, wasn't it? The presidential elections. And I'm a rookie on US TV, but from a news perspective, I know there's like Fox and MSNBC or something along those lines, and it was really interesting. As we tune into one show, and I don't know which one it is, the other side, and I have no eggs in the game anyway. But it's funny to watch one and see everything being so one party and against the other, and yet you change your channel, and then it's the complete opposite. It's we're now pro this one and anti the other one, and literally depending on which TV channel you watch, it will program you. And I know people tend to have their favorites. Right? It's like, I always watch this show. I always watch this show, and I wonder if it's you watch that show because that's your way inclined, or you're that way inclined because you watch that show. And I think it's the same with social media as well. I've got the phone here, and you go onto social media, and let's say I've had a conversation with you, and me and you have talked about a certain topic. And to keep it clean, we'll go with double glazing. Let's say I want to get some new windows. Immediately, my phone starts showing me all these adverts of double glazing and things along those lines, because it's been listening. Maybe you haven't Android and Alexa and Siri and all those things. But it's this idea that the world reflects to us what we want to see. And this is confirmation bias in psychology, right? It's we see what we believe, and then we reinforce those aspects. So like you said there with the burnout aspect is, there's so many different things. I'm not doing anything, but I'm reinforcing it because I'm always looking at the world the same way. And so we do get into those situations where we're just stuck and we're challenged. And I love that idea is let's kind of reconnect with that aspect. Okay, I can move forward now. All right, let's get you back on the boat and start to do some more interesting things. It's fascinating, isn't it? This is where I love the nerdy side. So thanks for bringing this in. I tried to write them down as we're going along. But this is where I love the frameworks, because the frameworks piece together all of the components. When I look at stress, or when most people look at stress, it's just stress. It's a million things all at the same time, and I have no way of breaking it down. But when I get these kind of models or these components, and I say, okay, well, I can tackle that piece, or I can tackle that piece, or this one. You've highlighted a couple of really interesting ones. Is there any other models that you kind of turn to or lean on to help people deal with some of these challenges that they come to you with?
Well, one of the things that, again, according to self-determination theory, one of the many theories in there is basic psychological needs theory. And what that says is that we, human beings, everybody, all of us, all across the globe, we have three basic psychological needs. One is autonomy, another is competence, and another is relatedness. Now, autonomy is one of those things that, again, where the definitions become very important, because in in just people talking to each other, just regular vernacular, a lot of times autonomy is interpreted as independence or freedom. And it's not conceptualized in exactly that way in self-determination theory. Autonomy is more, as a basic psychological need, it's more about engaging in an activity of your own volition. Like you're not feeling pressured, that you see the value and the importance of what it is that you're doing. And so you're leaning into it. That sense of, I'm choosing, yes, maybe, but more I identify with the value and importance of this thing. And I make that distinction because I did work with the Army for 10 years. And a big part of that culture is orders. But you can be autonomously motivated to engage in a behavior. You can have that basic psychological need of autonomy met, even while being ordered to do something, meaning you have to do it. You can still do it autonomously because you see the importance of it. You see the value of it. You see why it is that you're doing it. And you completely agree, wholeheartedly buy into the rationale. So we can be autonomously motivated. We can have that need for autonomy met, even if we're made to do something or we're in a situation where that's the case. Competence is not the sense, it's not being good at something. It's the belief that we are capable of becoming good at something, that we're capable of being effective in a situation. So we don't necessarily have to be good at it, but we do have to believe that we're capable of contributing, of capable of it, when we put in effort, that we can improve, we can grow, we can become competent. And then the last one, and this goes across a bunch of different theories and a lot of literature, this idea, they call it relatedness, goes by the name of connection. You'll also hear it as belonging, but it really just comes down to the relationship that we have with other people. And the basic psychological need of relatedness is just the belief that we are accepted and valued members of a group, that we are accepted not because of what we bring or what we do or any of those, extrinsic things like that. It's just who we are, that the group itself would not be the group that it is if we weren't a part of it, and that we are appreciated for simply making the group what it is. That's relatedness. And if you were picking up on it, the word belief came at all three. I believe that this thing is important, valuable, part of who I am. I believe that I'm capable of being competent and effective. And I believe that I'm accepted by this group. It all comes down to belief. And this is where it becomes, as for leaders trying to create climates where people have these needs fostered, which a lot of benefits come from that, which that's a whole nother conversation. But for leaders who are trying to foster climates where that happens, you can't do it. You can't make somebody believe that they're effective, or you can't make somebody believe that they are an accepted part of the group. And it happens all the time. You have the barbecues or the group outings or the team whatevers. Okay, well, you're doing that, but that's not a guarantee that people are going to feel connected and really a part of the thing. They have to believe it themselves. Now, are there ways to create an environment and ways to provide feedback and ways to interact that make it more likely that people will believe that they're connected, believe that they're effective, and believe that they're operating of their own volition in their own place for the right reasons? Absolutely, there are. And that's an important thing to do. And I've done quite a few talks on that. I've done a lot of class. In fact, I developed a class on that for the U.S. Army, gave it a bunch of times. So can it be done? For sure. But at the end of the day, you can't control it as a leader. You can't make it happen. You can't push a button and make people's basic psychological needs be satisfied. So I think that's another framework that when we're thinking about well-being, we can examine it through those two lenses, or three lenses. Do I feel like I'm pressured into things? Do I feel like I'm just being bounced around by the world? Do I feel like I'm incapable or ineffective? Like whatever steps I take, I keep screwing it up. I'm not able to move forward, or that I'm not really connected, that I've even maybe been ostracized by the group. I'm certainly not accepted. Those are all things that will impact overall well-being.
It's really interesting. It kind of right at the end uncovered another rock with loads of creepy crawlies underneath. But that is that idea of culture and the role of a leader in creating an environment where resilience isn't something that is kind of frowned upon. It's something that's supported. And we mentioned this, is that the prevalence of mental challenges and psychological safety, all those things is more easy to be discussed. I think there is in general still a stigma and a challenge to say, oh, I'm not feeling great mentally. We can have a bad day physically and we're allowed a day off there. But if I don't feel it from a mental perspective, then just get on with it and suck it up. I think there's a lot of space to talk about these challenges. That I think that one topic. So maybe we need to come back and have another conversation on the culture of
these
resilience.
Podcasts are so fun. I really enjoy it, and I've had a great time talking to you. So anytime you want me back, just let me know. We'll put it on the calendar. We'll make it happen. This has been a great time.
Well, I think we've squeezed so much out of you today, so I'll give you a break for at least a couple of weeks, maybe, and we'll definitely get it back on. But Brian, thank you so much for sharing not just the stories, but the frameworks and the models, but also just kind of giving people an idea that actually there is hope. It doesn't matter how challenging the world is. There's ways that I can break that down to rebuild not just the world, but also myself in the different components. So thank you for sharing so many different techniques today. If people want to find out a little bit more, what's the best way to get in contact or learn more about your teachings and lessons?
Yeah, the website's the best place to do that. It's brianhiteglobal.com, BRIAN. Last name is HITE, global, GLOBAL.com. And you'll see information about me. You'll see information about the programs that I offer on stress and pressure and performance and motivation and burnout. All of those things are on the website. And I'll tell you, I just would encourage this. If anybody listening, if this is a struggle that you're dealing with, struggling with stress, struggling with pressure, struggling with being overwhelmed in performance settings, not really knowing how to move forward or what to do or feeling stuck, and you don't have somebody to walk you through that, to hold your hand and take you through the process of working through those challenges, please just go to the website, read the stuff. If anything resonates with you, reach out. You can email me at brian@brianhiteglobal.com, or you can just schedule a discovery call right there on the website. I'd love to talk to you. I've been there. I've struggled with motivation. I have absolutely struggled with both stress and pressure. It's a hard place to be, and I'd love to help you if I can.
There's a great offer, and I'll definitely put links to all of those bits and pieces in the show notes. So if you're listening, just click on one of the links below. But Brian, thanks again for your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience, and just giving us all a little insight into ways we can improve things from a resilience and mindset perspective.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.